In this guide, we're going to talk about the power of making mistakes and how we can leverage that in order to improve as developers. To start off, we're going to take a step back in time and we're going to jump back to when I had my first semester as a graduate student in the computer science division for Texas Tech University. I was incredibly excited because I was going to be able to start learning from Dr. Michael Gelfand, who is one of the most well-respected AI researchers in the world. He's actually written his own programming language specifically targeting how to create artificial intelligent agents. Very well respected, has more papers than I can count, and I was so excited that I was going to be able to learn from him in this class. Now that excitement ended pretty much the first day, because when I went into the class, I started to notice a trend, and this happened almost immediately, and it continued for the entire semester. And that trend was that Dr. Gelfand would actually come up to us as he was giving his lecture, and he would have us as students come up to the whiteboard in front of the entire class and write programs. Now that would be a challenging and kind of intimidating task, especially if you've never done it before. However, he would do this before he had even told us and before he had taught us the program that he wanted us to write. So he would introduce some kind of principle. He talked a lot about Boolean logic in the beginning. So he would have us come up and we'd write a program that implemented the algorithm that he was talking about. But he hadn't taught us how to do it yet. He wanted to see the way that we would do it, and I can tell you from experience that we failed much more than we ever succeeded. I want to say, and I don't think I'm even exaggerating, for the 10 people that he would call up, I'd say 8 or 9 of them completely failed. And sometimes I would get up to the board and I would have no clue what to write. I had no clue whatsoever. And this made for a pretty intimidating kind of class. Now, for the first few times when this happened, I thought, man, Dr. Gelfand is just being mean to all of us, and he is making us get up there and we're embarrassing ourselves. And after a while though, after a few weeks, and then definitely after a few months, I started to notice a very cool thing, and that was that Dr. Gelfand was actually doing something on purpose. He wasn't explaining why he was doing it. He never told us why he was calling us up to the board and to do something that he hadn't even taught us to do yet. But what he was doing is he was letting us make mistakes and make mistakes in front of other people so that we could learn it. So let's take an example of one of the algorithms that I had to implement. I had to go up and write an entire principle and show, using Dr. Gelfand's programming language, how it worked in relation to some truth tables. If you don't know what truth tables are, that's perfectly fine. You can think of them as being able to implement kind of if-else kind of conditionals, except to do it without a programming language like Ruby or something like that. So the actual implementation doesn't matter. The important thing is I can remember, even to this day, this is years later now that I'm filming this compared to when I went through the class, I can actually remember the program that I wrote up there. I did it wrong the first time, but I also remember the correct time when I went and I had to fix it. So what the process is, I would go up and whoever got called up would go up the board, try to write the program. We'd most likely fail, go sit in our seats, we'd be very embarrassed. But after that, Dr. Gelfand would get in front of the class, he would look at the program, and then he would start analyzing it and then correcting it. By taking this approach, I was actually able to learn much more than if he just lectured. So take, for example, that same program that I got called up to write. If he would have just lectured, I could have not paid attention, I could have just taken some notes and never really thought twice about it, but because I was forced to do something and because I failed, I actually have remembered that program years later. So the power that Dr. Gelfand was giving each of us was every time we made a mistake and every time we did one, especially in front of somebody else, he was able to impart to us almost a lifelong kind of memory and knowledge on those items we were making mistakes on. So that's something that I've discovered is incredibly powerful. And take another example with our boot camps. Whenever I'm teaching a class, especially when I'm in person and I'm teaching it, I love to have the students come up and actually write parts of the program while I'm teaching it. And usually they'll get the program wrong or they'll really struggle with it, and that's perfectly fine. Sometimes I'm asking them to do something that they've never done before, but by forcing them to get up there, to have the pressure of people watching them and to have to think on the spot, I can promise you that they're going to have, out of all the students in that group, they're going to have learned those few commands much more, and they're going to be able to remember it much longer than a lot of the other students. And this gets back to the power of making mistakes and the power of letting failures really teach you. I just got finished reading a book called Failure is Not an Option by Gene Kranz. Now, Gene Kranz was one of the head guys at NASA. If you've ever watched the movie Apollo 13, he was the guy down in Houston who was helping the astronauts navigate through all of the problems and all the struggles that they had. And he is really famous for being able to take one of the most damaged aircrafts and be able to bring the entire crew home safely. The book is phenomenal. If you love history, especially that era of history, I highly recommend it. But what I really want to talk about with that in relation to the power of failure is, it's funny that he said the title of his book is that failure is not an option. But the thing that I found fascinating is if you look at the approaches that he and the other astronauts and the entire early NASA team did and all the processes that they put in place for training, they constantly failed. They did it on purpose, and they did it over and over and over again, and they failed so many times so that when it came time for the real missions, they were able to be successful. I remember one specific story when he was talking about the way that they trained for the very first ever time when the Apollo spaceship landed on the moon and the lunar program. He talked about the training that they had to do for that. They brought in some very mean testers, and they would put them through all kinds of scenarios, and they would make the machines do things that in their mind they never even thought the machines were even capable of doing, just to test them and to make them fail. And he said it got very frustrating. There were constant times where he would just leave the office and would be depressed because he had spent the entire day failing in every single scenario they brought to them. But by doing that, they were constantly able to learn about the different systems that they needed to put into place. They were able to make their systems much less buggy, and through that, that's the reason why they were able to create such amazing technology, even at an age where computers were really just in their infancy and they were really having to do everything by hand. Specifically on the lunar mission, a number of the different bugs and a number of the things that they had to fight against in the real life mission were things that they had learned from their failures early on, and that's how they were able to overcome them and to be able to eventually put a man on the moon. Now, before I end, I want to add one more benefit to being able to learn from mistakes, and that is that mistakes really kill pride. If you are constantly going through the motions and you're building program after program and never really forcing yourself to fail or never putting yourself in a situation where you will fail. So say that you're a web developer, but you never really stretch yourself out there and you don't get to the point where you're having to implement things that you've never done before, then you're not going to be able to make the same progress as someone who is constantly constantly out there stretching the limits and trying to put themselves in situations that they have never gone through before. That person, the person who goes through and takes all the hard tasks they can imagine and goes and makes sure that every single day they're learning something new, even if they're failing the first few times or even the first few dozen times. I know there are so many times when I'm learning something new that, especially if it's a challenging or really advanced topic, that I have a very difficult time with it. And there are times where I'll go through and it seems like I'm never going to learn the concept, and it can be very depressing. But the harder it is, what I've discovered is that actually translates into me knowing the concepts even better and having a better memory of them even years later. I can remember some of the most challenging things that I was learning when I was just a new developer, things that seem to me incredibly basic now. Being able to go through those challenges and being able to be strengthened by them is what has made me to be the developer I am today. So in summary, whenever you come against failure, whenever you come against challenges as a developer, don't shrink away from that or try to avoid them. Instead, embrace them and see what you can learn as you work through every one of the failures you come across, and you'll be in much better shape at the end of the day.